Hello, hello, and welcome to 10 p.m. with Galinsky. Hello, Shreya. Hello, Monte-Angel. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Good. So good to have you guys on the show. There's a few shout outs from people in our chat. Dana Franklin's with us, Savannah Dakota, David Otero, Carly Palmer. David, yeah. John Harris, the Andrew Einhorn is with us, Charmaine Singer.
Wow.
Bunch of really great people in the crowd. So I'm really excited to have you guys on because you're two people who have an interest in something that actually, my question is, do you have an interest? You wrote this white paper about the assault rifle epidemic, so to speak, in the middle of this pandemic, this spike in purchases. And the numbers are ridiculous. I've got them in front of me, and I know we're going to talk about them, but 3.7 million background checks were conducted in March of this year, 2.5 million of those for guns. That's a huge increase. And then the hate rhetoric, 900% increase on Twitter. And all these factors, 26 million people applying for unemployment insurance, all these factors create a stew. And you guys have taken these factors, and now tell me, what is this stew? Briefly, what is this white paper, and what is the result of your studies based on these statistics?
So I'll go ahead and start it off, Robert.
Sure.
Again, thank you so much for inviting us on the show. The reason why we wrote the white paper is we've been in this field for about 2 years for me, longer for Monte-Angel. And so when people think about predictive analytics, they think it's about pinpointing the next mass shooting down to the T, but rather to look at the general trends and coming to a conclusive decision on what the next couple of years look like for mass shootings. So we analyzed an amalgam of 3 factors. We looked at the rise in firearm purchases, economic instability, and the increase in hate-based rhetoric towards one specific minority group. And we decided these 3, again, looking at past factors. We looked at, the rise in gun purchases from Hurricane Katrina, from 9/11. We analyzed all these factors and overlaid them from each other. And we came to the conclusion that these next few months to this next year, after extended quarantine periods, is a critical time for mass shooting activity. We're not pinpointing it on one specific event, but it's more of a precautionary, better safe than sorry kind of white paper, pointing, the general public to the resources that we looked at and the solutions that we proposed.
Monte-Angel, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that a big challenge with collecting data in this field in general is that we don't have very good data. We have what we have from collecting our own data and from looking at what is pre-existing, but we need better data to determine what causes gun violence and mass shootings and how to determine the best interventions for them. So I'm coming at it from a social work perspective, and I'm interested in knowing this information so that we can intervene on this and make it stop happening. But the last time gun violence research was federally funded was 1996. As of December 2019, we finally have some money, 25 million allocated for gun violence research. And so that's a really great opportunity. And I think that the federal government and, agencies that are interested in this need to use that to make a standardized definition of what is a mass shooting. In one study of mass shootings in 2017, the number of shootings for the year varied from 11 to 346. Depending on the definition used. So we can't really, do a lot with that unless we have a better standardization of what that looks like.
Is the data, someone's asking, Samantha in chat, is your data public?
Our data, the data that we use varies. So some of it is proprietary to our organization, NeverAgainTech, in terms of the crawlers and extractors that we built. It's very confidential, but we're really just looking at, forums where fringe communities populate, so areas like 4chan and 8chan. So that data is more proprietary to us, but anyone can access it if they build the right technology mechanism.
And if I'm sorry, go ahead.
And most of the data that we use, though, for our other, aspect of the organization, all come from publicly funded research institutions that have, attempted to tackle it before. Biggest one would be Mother Jones Gun Violence Archive and the Stanford Mass Shooting Library. They all vary in one or two different aspects. So our organization, NeverAgainTech, is looking at coalescing all of these data sets together and building it out and filling in the gaps where one might be lacking in order to make it the best position for any technological algorithm to work.
Let's back up for a second now. This isn't something necessarily you stumbled upon. You both experienced mass shootings, and I really want to talk about that because I think it's important for us to hear what you witnessed, and so that we can become witnesses ourselves through you. And I don't remember who, but one of you has been through 2 mass shootings. Monte-Angel. So if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about what that experience was like. Where were you? What were the conditions? How did you make it through that? And then we'll talk more about after, but tell us about the experience, if you don't mind.
Sure, I can go first. I think that I've lived in the shadow of mass violence my whole life. My cousin went to high school at a school that experienced a mass shooting in the 90s. And then there was one that happened in my middle school. And then the one that really catapulted me into this career was the one that happened at UC Santa Barbara in 2014 when I was a senior there as an undergraduate student. And people who've experienced that event, we don't call it a mass shooting because it wasn't only shootings and gun violence that happened. There was also other forms of violence that took place, but it really rattled our community, which is also just so small and geographically blocked off by the ocean and different things, that it really changed us forever in a lot of really bad ways, but also in a lot of really positive ways. Things came out of it in terms of gun policy changes and the community really coming together to make sure that things like that wouldn't happen again.
For you personally, what has changed, good and bad?
Everything about my career changed. I was a senior, I was figuring out what I wanted to do. I wasn't sure yet. I know I wanted to make a difference. I was really connected to my community already, which had already been through so many instances of domestic violence, suicide attempts that year, and we were just starting to come over that. And then that happened. So it made me want to become a researcher of violence, and particularly a social work researcher.
And what about the emotional trauma for you, Monte-Angel? How did you deal with that? And I'm asking because other people go through, whether it's mass shootings, any kind of, physical harm or violence enacted upon them. How are you dealing with it? And how did you overcome it? Are you still dealing with it in different ways?
Yeah, I think that most people, including myself, would agree that it's not really something you get over. It becomes, at least for me, a part of my narrative. It's part of my story. And doing research about gun violence and about trauma is a way for me to heal. And I think that in the research that I've conducted about what's called post-traumatic growth, the idea that people can not only recover from trauma, but grow because of it, you have to take agency in some way. And I think that for me, the agency comes from doing this work and continuing to make sure it doesn't happen for other people.
PTG.
PTG, that's right.
Never heard that before. It's beautiful. Somebody in the chat, a good friend of mine, Becky Savelle, says her nephew was at UCSB when that shooting happened. She says, love to you, G. And Callie Greenberg says, love that the community came together. Shreya, tell us about where you were and what happened in the event that you were part of.
Yeah, so I'm 19 years old. So basically,
wait a minute, the computer skipped a little. It sounded like you said 99.
No, 19, 19. Yep. So I'm basically known as what we call the mass shooting generation, and I come from Colorado. So I've been at the heart of Columbine, and I've basically experienced anything. But something for me as part of being the younger generation that experienced this is, they've always been in the back of my mind. I've never really felt compelled to do action. But after Emma Gonzalez spoke at the March for Our Lives conference, where she said, we call BS on the senators and policymakers who are not doing anything about, people are getting abhorrently ripped out of their daily lives because of these mass shootings, that's when I knew that it was my call to action. And so that's when I was like, okay, well, Emma Gonzalez and all these March for Our Lives folks are approaching this conversation from a very activist perspective. But that's not who I am. I'm a technologist. So I really wanted to see how my technology and the technological perspective I bring to the table could you be used in a meaningful way in this conversation. And so, as going back to what I said, Columbine, Arapahoe, Aurora Theater, all of these things were some things I experienced indirectly, but last year during the STEM school mass shooting was when things hit a very personal level for me. So my younger brother was in the classroom right next to where the shooting occurred, and he saw the bullet hit the wall, and he saw the glass shattering and the blood spilling, and the way he describes, and I was trapped outside of the school when everyone else was rushing out. And the thing about STEM is it's kindergarten through high school, so we saw little kids coming out. And for me, I hope that's the closest I ever get to truly experiencing a mass shooting. But the emotional trauma, just like Monte-Angel said, you never really get over it. And I'm not someone who was even inside the school. I experienced it secondhand, but it's still something that I get up every day and I can't really comprehend that happened. So that really was my personal taste of it. But I think that for the first time, I was able to envision the emotion and the humans behind the data that I saw. And that really gave me a compelling factor to continue my work.
I know you said you're a data person, but you're an activist in my eyes because of what you're doing. You're taking that data and you are enlightening us. So many facts I read in that white paper blew my mind. There are so many people in the chat. I just want to point out that they're shouting you out. Carly Palmer, excited to be here and learn. Michaela Duyar, Kayla Wood, Barbara Mendez, Gabriella Wood, Chelsea Ruff. Gabriella Wood says, I'm watching. Nicole Munoz Pro. Barbara Mendez says, thank you, Monte-Angel Richardson, for being such a strong advocate. You inspire many. Nadia Beatty is with us. Carly Palmer says, such a difficult topic to speak on and share. Thank you, Monte-Angel. Colleen Anna, Emily Siegel's with us. Shreya, you're inspiring, says Carly Palmer. And you got to hear this because this is part of I think the importance. This is the fuel to keep going, is to hear that people need to hear this. Gabriella Wood says, inspiration. September Eaton just joined us. Robert Correa just joined us. Ethan Hirschenfeld is with us. Gabby Jane Haag is with us. Let's see, just a couple more. Katha Cato, who's the director of the Queens World Film Festival, says, God, the images that are running right now are beyond anything. Right this second is gut-wrenching. Let me ask you, how do you tie into the what's happening? Because you're talking about more right now, the papers about the mass shootings, so to speak, but the conversation is bigger than that. George Floyd, for example, and the decades of violence begot upon brown people in this country. How do you figure that into your studies, or do you have you taken that into consideration? How do you look at that?
So I'll start off and then I'll deflect it to Monte-Angel. I personally, through my studies, have realized that violence is still violence. It begets many forms, whether it be mass shootings, whether it be police brutality. Violence is fundamentally the same in terms of what forms it and what are the consequences of it. Communities are impacted past the victims itself. And in this, going back to our white paper, we realized that, although violence takes the form of mass shootings, the culmination of these three factors point to a more, poignant picture of, civil unrest and our inability to coalesce and be as one after extended periods of isolation. And I think that the combination of economic instability as well as what we are seeing with, the political environment, what we're seeing with this, it's just the overlapping of factors that culminates in a general period of unrest, of violence, of, basically people kind of forming coalitions against each other. That's something that piques me as a data scientist, but also a citizen. And so I'll deflect it to Monte-Angel because of the more of the intervention strategies that we find are similar. But I will say that, whether it's about George Floyd's case or whether it's about the inevitable mass shootings, our citizen response should be the same and equal when we're dealing with such dire circumstances.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that for me, the research that I do started with mass shootings because that's what I've experienced the most directly. But violence comes either way. Like I said earlier, we don't even refer to the Isla Vista tragedy as a shooting because there was other violent acts that happened. And when I got that call and they said there's shootings in Isla Vista, I was at first honestly like, okay, there's always shootings in Isla Vista. And that's just
What is Isla Vista? I'm not familiar with Isla Vista.
Yeah, that's the town where the tragedy happened. It's kind of like the town right next to UC Santa Barbara.
Gotcha.
Like violence was just so much a part of our culture that I didn't think, oh, this is different until more details started coming out. So yeah, violence is a disease. Like gun violence is a disease and it needs to be treated like a disease. And so I do a lot of research between social work and public health, and there's this term called syndemics, which is a negative synergy when two or more diseases occur in a population and exacerbate the effects of one another. So right now, we got a pandemic, we got gun violence, and we got institutional violence, and those things kind of coalesce together to make it a lot worse. So I just think that gun violence, mass violence needs to be treated like a disease. We need to tackle it with awareness, outreach, disaster prevention, and community tracking. And we need to think about all the multiple spheres of influence that are involved in that approach. And that involves so many people that it seems overwhelming, but it can be done. Communities are doing it.
There's a little debate raging on my Facebook page, and you guys said you had noticed it, about violence right now. The burning of Minnesota, in Minnesota, and a comment I made was "Let it burn, let it burn," and I gave the example to you guys of your child comes home from school, gets smacked, and says, "I got smacked." You say, "Well, ignore the person." You go back to school tomorrow, they come home again, "They got smacked. I got smacked." Well, tell the teacher. The teacher doesn't do anything. Third day, kid gets smacked. Fourth day, the kid goes back to school, tells the principal doesn't do anything. Call the other parents of the kid, they don't do it. The kid keeps getting smacked. So finally the parent says to their kid, "You got to smack them back." What do you think of that? And because for me, 400 years of violence upon Black people, brown people, that's the language that this system speaks. And you guys have mentioned it in your own terms. It's part of the institution of this country. And so what point do you look at violence and say, turning the other cheek just hasn't solved anything? When is it time to start speaking the language of the oppressor, which is violence, and speak that language back? What do you think of that? Tell me your thoughts.
Yeah. Great question, Robert. And if it was in any other situation, I'd happily answer it. The work that we're doing at NeverAgainTech is strictly from a nonpartisan perspective. And the reason why I mentioned this, and the reason why it's so integral to our approach, is because data and the technology, especially in this AI field, becomes very biased by the people who use it and the people who start to develop and build those systems. So whenever we are in this mindset of data for social good, we practice actively in my organization, keeping an unbiased and non-political perspective as much as we can. And so to your question about violence begetting more violence, or if violence is justifiable, at least for me, and I know Monte-Angel probably has her own thoughts on this, it's all about what the data points to, what the research points to, and what the evidence points to as being most effective. And our jobs as data scientists and as predictive analytics practitioners is to simply look at the data and draw out trends, forecast trends, and then make viable solutions for everyone to follow. But the reason why NeverAgainTech is so distinguished from other organizations in this field is because we're not inherently left or right leaning. We have no such opinions on anything that doesn't directly relate to the data behind our cause. And so with that, I'll say, and I'll let Monte-Angel speak, but I do have a multitude of answers that I want to give, but I think as data scientists and in a field that already encourages so much bias, especially against the oppressor, especially against the victim, it's important to maintain as neutral of a stance as possible.
I appreciate your discipline. I really do.
Yeah, I think that my perspective is similar, but as a data scientist and a social worker, I kind of think of it in a multiple brained thing. That's a weird way to say it. But I think that if people are acting violently, it's because they're not getting needs met. And I think that as a social worker, I want to know what the data and research says about those needs. And I think that what I've seen in my research is that to intervene on violence, state-based, street-based, mass violence, there needs to be collaboration, and that just doesn't happen. Like, there's not a lot of collaboration between data scientists, mental health workers, policymakers, and community members. And so we're missing that coordinated response that includes all of those aspects. So we're not getting at it because violence doesn't come from one thing. It doesn't come from one thought or sphere of our world. It's a multiple sphere of problems, so it needs to be dealt with through multiple spheres. So that I'm interested in those techniques, and I think that through evaluation and through research, like, we can find out what's working and what's not working, both on like the personal level and institutionally.
Shreya, I'm gonna test you a little bit here, or press you a little bit here. Where and when would you be able to answer those questions? Where and when, in what context would you be able to give us your opinion, your emotion, you know, your expression of opinion, not data?
Not data. I think as long as I'm a part of NeverAgainTech, I'm going to be as disciplined as possible, because as we've seen time and time again, those who have an inherent opinion about the data that they're going to use, it reflects in the data and it reflects in their methodology. So even though I have a multitude of opinions and I try to disperse this among my team too, which Monte-Angel is the best example of this, we go in with as neutral of a position as possible, so our resulting data and consequences and technology have only one thing that they attest to, which is the truth and not what.
And a great example of that lack of discipline is what we're seeing with a lot of the statistics around the COVID and what's going on right now, where certain institutions and organizations and individuals are slanting, or maybe not so strong a word as slanting, but allowing their opinion to affect the data. So great point. I really appreciate that you're getting that across to us. I'm looking off left and right at my chat windows. I'm not paying attention to you, but I got to shout out some of our chatters and see if there's any questions from the chatters. Right now, you're just getting a lot of compliments. Nadia Beatty's with us. Carly Palmer, such a difficult topic to speak upon. Thank you, and sharing. Barbara Mendez, thank you, Monte-Angel, for being a strong advocate. You inspire. Emily Siegel's with us. September Eaton's with us. Gabriella Wood says inspiration. Carly Palmer, Shreya, you're inspiring. Robert Correa's with us, doing a great job. Proud of you, Monty. Ryan Oberg's with us. Thank you for sharing. Ruby, Gina, Shannon, Linda, you're with us. Good point on gun violence as a disease. Gina Angel says, yes, satisfy needs first. Gabriella Wood, the violence is a disease, not the guns. Gabriella Wood says this. Maddie Gale, Lehman, Jeff Forrest joined us. Joseph Reynoso. Carly Palmer, wise woman, Shreya, data is and should be unbiased. A coordinated response sounds like a crucial, multifaceted approach. Thank you, Monte-Angel, says Nicole. Over here, Mark Birnbach knows you, Shreya, from We Are Family, says, so happy you're speaking. Callie Greenberg has a question. Do you think the basic needs of love, belonging, and freedom are not being met?
For me, or I think for both of us. In any of these situations, no, they're not. But what I can say is we can't make conclusive decisions on that either, because violence, again, is multifaceted. And we've seen that once violence is curbed, another problem pops up. So sometimes it is a result of the dire lack of, having love, of having, the appreciation. But then again, in countries where violence does not occur, it's some other institutional problem occurs. So all I'm saying, back to what I was saying, is definitely, but until we have to look at it and see it. Once love and freedom and all those facets you just described are met, would violence still be a prevalent issue? And maybe Monte-Angel can say some things on that.
Yeah, I'm really interested in taking my research in the future into a kind of global comparative approach to see why in places where gun ownership is high, why is there less violence in those places? And what I can say from the research that I have done is that in those places where that is the case, there's more social protective factors for people, which may lead to more of those kind of psychological level terms, which can also be analyzed, like belongingness. Community cohesion is a big protective factor for gun violence and street violence. So programs in the United States are trying to make that happen. There's things called safe house programs, particularly for mass violence, but also for street violence, where certain homes are kind of designated as places where you can go and you can be safe if there's an incident. There's things like Safe Streets program in Baltimore and Boston and Ceasefire Chicago, and those include street outreach workers and violence interrupters, and they go into communities and work with people, but they're tailored for the community. So it's not a one-size-fits-all model. And so things are happening, but like I said, they're just happening so sparse and not regulated that we're not getting the data we need, like Shreya said, to make those kind of claims, which we need to do more work in this field.
Yep.
Gotcha. It's 10:30. Our show's over.
Oh, wow. That's fast.
Unless you guys are willing to stick around and our chatters let us know that they want a little more. Are you willing to stick around?
Sure.
Excellent. So in order to do that, we go into overtime. We have to play a little game, and then we'll get back into our conversation. During this shutdown, I've noticed things in my house that I hadn't seen and realized I need that, I don't need that, what's it doing here? So I picked 5 objects. I'm going to show you 5 different objects, one at a time. I just want your quick gut response to each of the objects, what they mean to you, what they make you feel. All right? And just so that it moves along smoothly, Monte-Angel, you go first. Shreya, you go second. Here's your first object, an 8-ball.
Magic.
Future.
Future. Good. A Hawaiian lei.
Like middle school dance.
A good dance?
Yeah.
Shreya?
Luau.
A luau. You can go more than one word if you want. It's okay.
Okay.
Okay. A grater, a kitchen cheese grater, bread grater, garlic grater, whatever you want.
I don't know why we use those. Let's just buy shredded cheese. Data science.
Shreya?
Parmesan, but also a very, very faulty mechanism that I've cut my finger on before.
Yeah, right, exactly. A lucha wrestler.
Oh man, something that would get stuck in my little brother's throat when he was a kid.
I would say if it's not part of the Marvel universe, I don't really know who it is.
And the last one, a favorite of mine. Some of it we won't see because of the green screen.
Oh, just great memories.
The one scary episode where they're both in like that area where no one else knows where they're going. It's like, it just gives me nightmares.
I hate that. Freaks me out.
Jack Fuller's got a question in the chat here. Here we go. Isn't it fundamental for the person who needs or wants a gun that they feel a need or right to kill, be it animals or people? Can we promote and help to change the attitude or value that some people seem to believe in? So it's a little shaky, this question, the writing here. Jack, rephrase the question. I didn't have a chance to prep it. It's in the chat. Rephrase the question. Catholic Cato would like to know, and first of all, Tammy T says, you're definitely inspirational because you're so young and you're making a major difference in the world. Callie Greenberg says she's inspired hearing Monty and Shreya. Catholic Cato, who is, I won't divulge her age, but she's in my bracket. She says, will my generation be able to transcend the disease of gun violence? Do you have any data to answer that question?
To answer that question, I think it's something that's very entrenched institutionally. You know, it doesn't just go back to 2000. The first known mass shooting incident happened in 1960 or earlier. So over the years, it's been, you know, kind of like a snowball effect, right? And when, as our data points out, when mass shooting activity happens, it happens in clusters. So not just one sparse incident, it inspires many to continue to do the same. And then, you know, it just kind of explodes from there. So I think that in order to answer your question, we can't make any definitive answers. We can't make any definitive conclusions. I would hope so. And we have the right people working on the right things to make sure that happens. But, change in any form is very, very gradual. But what we hope to do is expedite that change through a very nonpartisan, data analytic and policy oriented perspective, where we're not so entrenched in what's like right or wrong or what's morally good or not, and more focused on, well, how do we save as many kids and how many innocent citizens' lives do we save as much as possible. So I hope that the reintroduction of this kind of perspective expedites the amount of time it takes, where it's not politically entrenched and it's not just going back and forth between two parties of various vastly different perspectives.
You want to add anything, Monte-Angel?
People need to treat dealing with gun violence and gun violence prevention like dealing with a disease, like I said before. I think that when it comes to cancer, we don't just give up on dealing with cancer after 20 years if we don't find our results. We keep digging. And I think that in order for people to stay digging, we have to have the funding we need, for one, but we have to stay sensitized to these issues. It's very easy to get desensitized to shootings and to violent incidents in general. So it's important to remember that behind all these data points and statistics, those are people and those are lives that have been permanently altered, even if they didn't pass.
Yep, and I would just, sorry, one last thing. I think that the advantage we have is that we're young. Me personally, being only 19, I've had my fair share of people telling me that it's fruitless. It's gonna exist for 100 years to come, that what we're doing isn't gonna have any consequences. But to them, I say, fuck it. I'm part of the mass shooting generation. I've seen my friends, I've seen my own family members get impacted by this issue. So if we don't do anything about it now, then we definitely can't rely on anybody else to do it for us in the future. So I think that we, in my generation specifically, have the volition to make change. And it's not just in this mass shooting communities of guns, it's throughout climate change, it's throughout the protests that we see across the world right now happening. So I think that there's something very unique and honestly goosebump inducing about the action that we're choosing to take in Gen Z and millennials. And we would just love the guidance of our predecessors to help us out.
Couple more shout outs in the chat and then some questions. Maddie Gale, Jeff Forrest, Joseph Reyneso, Bhavya Gupta, the great Annie Green is with us from We Are Family. Carly Palmer says, wise woman, Shreya, data is and should be unbiased. Nicole Munoz Pro, a coordinated response, sounds like a crucial multifaceted point. Marie Parks is with us. Winnie Maria is with us. Lori Duffett. Gabriella Wood, do you feel it is entrenched because people accept the violence?
I think that it's entrenched. Yeah, so I'll let her think about it a little bit, but I think it's entrenched not only because, we accept it, but because some people are so rigid in their stance that they're unwilling to make a change. Right now, we are in a place where psychology and our psychological, like our egos, like Freud said, our egos kind of preclude us from making any change because we don't want to accept that we're wrong. We don't want to accept change because we're comfortable with the status quo. And that whether that be, we're comfortable with the status quo of peace or of violence, we are unable to make a change when we are needed to. And that's something that's entrenched in human behavior. So not only is it because we're desensitized, but like on a psychological level, it's hard for humans to accept when change needs to occur and when we're wrong and when we need to listen to someone else other than someone we're comfortable listening to. So I think, again, it's a really good question, but it's a combination of factors. It's not just one specific thing, but it comes down to the human psyche. We're unwilling to accept that, things need to be changed, to be rattled, and to be shattered in order for things to happen.
Monte-Angel, you're right. You're nodding your head.
Yeah.
You want to add?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Shreya said. There's just so many factors. Like I plan to spend my whole life untangling the mystery behind violence, so it's going to take a long time. But I think that one thing I notice already is there's an individual kind of path that's been established by mental health and behavioral health workers for dealing with violence. We kind of treat it on a case-by-case basis. Why does this person become violent? What caused them to do this? And that's why I'm really interested in studying community as the unit of my analysis, because these are structural issues. They're personal issues too, but they're also structural issues. And it's going to take kind of structural changes to make things happen as well as individual changes. So I think we're partially entrenched because we're not looking at a bigger, broader picture.
Couple new shout outs in here in the chat. Lynn Krozek-Klotzer, welcome, good to see you. Anthony Randall is with us from Planet Home. Amy Alt. Amy Alt has a question. Do you know if Richmond, Virginia is statistically high for gun violence?
Richmond, Virginia. Richmond, Virginia, suburban area, I would consider it as a suburban area. It's not an area considered an urban area like Denver or Chicago. It depends. That's all I would say. We really look at where there's been a statistical history of mass shootings in order to make a conclusion about where it looks like present tense. Virginia has had its fair share, things that we don't necessarily, that haven't been publicized to the extent of Sandy Hook or Columbine, but it definitely exists. But that being said, again, a location depends on a multitude of things. But one thing is that suburban areas are statistically less likely to experience day-to-day gun violence as opposed to inner city areas. But that being said, we still have to be cautionary about school shootings, about workplace shootings. Workplace shootings are one of the most common one of the most common types of mass shootings. You know, so areas where there are a lot of blue collar workers and firing and unemployment happen very sporadically, and there's no contingency plan in place for them to have a safe and successful future. That's where workplace shootings take place a lot. So in the area of as you know, coronavirus starts to wear off, and we see the consequences of unemployment, and we see the consequences of like economic instability, we have to be precautionary in every area. But areas where there are a lot of industrial workers or blue collar areas that are focused more on like other skill factors that are not technological, we are very concerned about those areas. So that's what I would say. I can't give an accurate number because, again, even if I give an accurate number, it still won't be accurate, but maybe Monte-Angel, yeah.
I think that's like the point of this work. Shreya was like pointing to all of these factors, and that's like the point of NeverAgainTech, as I've come to understand it, is to figure out what these factors are that make some areas more susceptible to gun violence, and what areas also what communities can do to protect themselves and demand protections from their government so that they aren't as prone to it. And I think that's the whole point of this research, is to figure out what those discrepancies are. And researchers have been doing it. Even though gun violence hasn't been funded in 20 years, research is still being done on gun and street violence, not as much on mass violence because that's not as well researched. But that's the hope with NeverAgainTech and other organizations kind of doing this work, is to figure out what those things are so we can say more clearly what factors might make a community more susceptible to gun violence.
In the chat, we got, I think we might have gotten a very strong point here. Callie Greenberg says, is it the rock bottom SpongeBob episode?
It is. It's the one where they're like in that place and all the tumbleweeds happen.
Jim Talbot joined us. B. Kim Taylor, great writer, is with us. She said, thank you for everything you two are doing. There's a couple of NRA questions here. One was, does the NRA inhibit any of the data? Does the NRA try to affect the data? And a quick add-on to that, Michael Swiskay, hi Michael, would like to ask, what would you say to Wayne LaPierre? So let's go with the first question. Does the NRA try to mess with your data and your attaining of that?
So a while ago, I think it was in the early 2000s, the Dickey Amendment was passed. It's a rider in a bill from Senator Dickey that basically prevents the CDC from conducting any gun violence related research due to its inherent politicalness. So for about like since 2000 or so, the last 2 decades, the CDC has not been able to conduct any gun violence research or any research that would inherently, take a stance on guns. And so that was a very, very big thing. It was an amendment sponsored by the NRA, or we can't say accurately, but it was definitely something that was sponsored by the NRA. So the NRA has done it. For whatever reasons they may be, the research is, there's a lot of gaps in the research. So if we had the CDC, which we now do since December 2019, for the last 20 years, we would have gotten a lot more accurate photos because the CDC looks at it, like Monte-Angel said, from from pandemic perspective. So treating gun violence as an epidemic, really. And so we're missing out on the epidemiological perspective. So the NRA has done so. In summation, the NRA has done so. We're finally transforming the effects of that stagnation that happened for the last 20 years. But in that sense, yeah, there's a lot of work to do. But since everything, the more privately funded and the more initiative that citizens themselves take instead of relying on a governmental agency to do the work for them, the more agency that we also have over, institutions like the NRA. So that's what we're approaching it from here.
Great. All right, so this is sort of a philosophical, non-data oriented question, I can already tell. Jack Fuller, he rephrased his question. If you feel a need to have a gun, you must feel okay with killing. Can we help promote that killing is not a good thing? Why do we need to kill?
I can try. I think that, I don't know if owning a gun makes someone feel ready to kill, because we don't, this is like a broken record. We don't have data on it. We haven't researched it. There hasn't been any research on this kind of thing in a long time. But so I think that, can you repeat the question?
Yeah,
I totally missed the second half.
It's a tough question, and it's not data oriented. If you feel okay. And have a gun, you must feel okay with killing. Can we help promote that killing is not a good thing? Why do we need to kill?
Yes, we can. Yes, we should. Yes, we are. I think that is one of these factors that needs to be part of it, is literacy and education about what violence does. And like I said, being sensitized to it. It's not just one thing. It's not like if we change all policies, violence is going to go away. Like, we have to be able to educate people on the reasons why this isn't a good thing. And that seems very elementary, but it's true. That's not done intentionally. And if it's continued to not be done intentionally, we're going to keep having problems.
Okay.
Great, Robert, can I say one thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
To your question, sorry, I forgot who asked it. I don't think so. I don't think people who have guns have an innate, inherent desire to kill, because Second Amendment, I've worked with people who are pro Second Amendment and who have guns. That's not necessarily the case. For them, it offers the sense of protection. Guns are a lot more cultural than this desire to kill. It's something that, offers protection. It's something tangible. Again, if we go back to the history of why the Second Amendment was created, it's something that, offers a sense of power. I mean, I'm not someone who owns a gun, but I can attest to them. It's not all about a desire to kill. Not every person who owns a gun even has a desire to kill. Animals are one thing, but in terms of killing other humans, that's a very, very rare case when we look at the amount of people in America who own guns. So really, I mean, Monte-Angel answered it perfectly in terms of the people who have a desire to kill and why that's important to, make sure that we don't, that we can, rewrite and, refactor that desire. But for most people in America who have a gun, it's not an inherent mechanism for them to kill a person. At least it's more of a sense of tangible protection, which is why it's so hard to enact basic laws. That's all I'll say on that.
Katha says our art reflects extreme conflict. Our laundry soap kills odors. Our movies glorify violence. I'm scared. Just a statement out of here in chat. B. Kim Taylor, can a law against NRA gun lobbying money be instigated?
It's something that's very powerful. Again, they have money. So even if we are able to write a law against NRA gun lobbying, there are multiple ways to circumvent it. Ways in which, again, politics is not so straightforward. Just because there's a law doesn't mean people will abide by it. So to answer your question, it will do a lot. But we still have to focus on, that's why the data, I think, is the most powerful here, the technology, because we're not focused on, there are tons of organizations out there that are focused on, rewriting, tackling those deeply entrenched issues. We're about stopping the perpetrators of mass shootings. So looking at social media analysis, understanding sentiments behind what people are using and what people are choosing to portray to the media, and then preventing them from there, because technology is one of the biggest factors that humans rely on today. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I know this is a bit of a side, but again, NeverAgainTech is about the technology, and I know there's tons of organizations out there, focused on, repealing policies and laws, but we found it most effective to consider it from the moment someone posts about about enacting a mass shooting to when it happens. So that's one of the answers. Monte-Angel, do you have anything to add?
I think that when it comes to policy, like that just points to like a very big rabbit hole in general, which is, NRA lobbying, campaign financing, all these different things. And that is like a really rich research area that should be explored more, is how effective are, gun policies, and, how effective are they in the short term, long term, and how proactive are they and how data based are they? Because a lot of times they're reactive. In the town where I had a mass shooting, we had gun policy change a month later because something happened, but not before that. So there needs to be some proactive changes, and data is a way to kind of prove why it's necessary.
Yeah, that's that makes total sense. Make things that make sense, but then don't get applied.
Yeah.
Right? Carly Palmer has a question. It's been sitting here for so long. Thanks for being patient, Carly. Since one shooting inspires many others, what are your thoughts on modifying media reporting on mass shootings? At what point is media reporting irresponsible? I understand it is important to share information, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Okay, sorry to that. I always like to let Monte-Angel come back up and answer all the gaps that I miss, because I can miss a lot. So my area specifically is when media reports the manifestos behind the shooting. A lot of people have the preconception that media is responsible for the cluster of mass shootings and the lone wolves that get inspired by the words that people are saying. But even if media doesn't play a role, we've been studying fringe communities that populate 4chan and 8chan. 8chan was the website last year where...
Say that again a little slower.
Sorry. So 8chan was the website where 3 big mass shooting manifestos were perpetuated last year. And from there, we got a ton of mini mass shootings and, intents to do it, but, are stopped by the police force. So while we study these fringe communities, the rhetoric there, it's not reported by the media. It's not to the extent that we can even see or imagine. Only a couple of people actually know the extent, including me, of how rhetoric is perpetuated there. And so we have this preconception that media is the one that, and media's extensive reporting of what the shooter went through, the kind of ideologies that he took, or he or she took, mainly he actually, took a part of. And, we think that that's what inspires these other lone wolf instigators, but actually in areas where fringe communities populate, where most internet users aren't aware of what is happening, those ideologies are being spread and disseminated like a wildfire, and the media doesn't have the slightest clue. So yes, media not reporting on what the shooter's manifesto was, or going into the deep ideologies, that might do some things. But before that, there's a whole underground community. I wouldn't say even underground, hidden in plain sight community of alt-right fringe community where toxic neo-Nazi behavior is being perpetuated on the internet, and that's where the whole clustering activity starts to occur.
Is 8chan still up?
It is not up, and it took the brand. I can still talk so much about this. Basically, everyone on 8chan went into 10 different directions. There's around 7 different websites that came up when 8chan was disbanded. Nchan, BunkerChan, 4chan, and 8chan itself has now been remastered into 8kun.net. So we first thought that just because the 8chan website went down, we were good, but no, now the activity is stronger than ever.
Yeah, like whack-a-mole. It's it is. I mean, that's it's the same thing with data collection in terms of news and social media, is the false belief that these are neutral platforms, but they're not. They're curtailed to our interests. We see what we want, what is presented to us based on our political beliefs, perspectives, what we post, the language we use. That's how the algorithms work. So you end up getting siloed into these communities that are very much based on your very specific interests. You can see it on Facebook. So that really makes people in these kind of circles feel very validated and very certain that what they're feeling and what they're doing is right, because they're getting that encouragement and they're not seeing other things. So it's the same thing. It's that same false belief of yes, we want this to be a neutral platform where everyone can express themselves, and we're encouraging people to kind of move further and further in their extremist perspectives, whether it's alt-right, incel, what have you.
There's a bunch of questions. We've got actually a few photographs that we want to take a look at to get a sense of some of the other experiences you've had. But I'm going to just do a couple of more quick questions out of our chat. and let you know. Elizabeth Harder says, yes, education, and you all should run for president, says Elizabeth. J.O. Sanders has joined us. J.O. Sanders, the brilliant J.O. Sanders, the mighty oak. He was actually my first guest, kicked this whole 10 p.m. thing off. Thank you, Jay, for being here tonight. Jack Fuller says, and B. Kim Taylor says, great points about the echo chambers on social media. Jack Fuller says, respectfully, when the Second Amendment was written, it took 10 minutes to load the muzzle and get off one shot. Protection. Yes, extremely important. Don't we have measures hopefully in place for this? Why do individuals need to own this responsibility?
So why do individuals need to own this responsibility? That is a question that can be best answered by the people who own the guns themselves. Because for them, it has a lot more of an emotional, compelling meaning than someone from the outsider can ever attest to. It's like, you know, what is the meaning for some people, not all? A gun is as valuable as a pet to them. So if someone were to ask me, you know, why do you have your pet teddy, or why do you need your pet teddy, right? Or why do you, even though they're two vastly different things, at the end of the day, that ownership aspect is something that can be best answered by those who partake in the activity or partake in that.
Yeah, I think some of these questions are out of desperation for some real solution and answer. And I know you guys don't have all of it, but you have.
But I will say that research is coming out. The National Coalition of Gun Violence Research recently put out a call for proposals, specifically researching the attitudes and perspectives of people who own guns. So that's why everyone is really excited to have this money open up from the federal government, because we can start doing research for these things that people desperately want to know, because for so long we were just not allowed.
Yep, and also it's like NeverAgainTech itself, again, we have like a group of people who are from that perspective, who can answer it better than me. But we are turning our focus and gearing up on, like, you know, answering why it's so important, because then it's easier for us to understand why violent incidences occur, because they all come from the place of owning a gun.
And there's this question kind of segues into that, what you just said there, Gabriella Wood. If there were no guns, would this problem not exist, in your opinion?
There would be no gun violence. I don't know.
There would be, exactly.
You know, people might go back to picking up sticks, right? You know,
on a worse level, I'm from India, and guns for them are bombs. There have been definitely to a lesser extent, but you know, guns take the form of various formats. So instead of guns in India, there's a lot of bombings that happen, and those are as equally volatile. So gun violence itself, exactly like Monte-Angel said, gun violence itself might be solved, but then violence has a multitude of forms.
Yeah, and I think the reason that gun violence in particular is a focus for a lot of researchers is because the intervention we're concerned about is harm reduction. We can't eliminate harm. Just like if you're working with someone who's an addict, you reduce the amount of things that they have around them that might make them do the drug that is the problem for them. So what is the most deadly? Is it cocaine or is it marijuana?
Yes.
Is it guns or is it knives? So that's kind of why this is so important.
Harm reduction, key. Ranjit Arabirakal says, thank you for your great work. Wally Green, the great table tennis player, has just joined us. Nilo Mansour has joined us. Leah Schroeder is with us. Aleja Marie is with us. Isaiah Henderson is with us. Carly Palmer says, thank you for your answers. Before we go into the photographs, tell us about the 4 Ds.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so in this paper, we talked a little bit about an intervention that people can do in terms of dealing with hateful rhetoric. I want to emphasize, not for gun violence. We're dealing with hateful speech and encountering that online or in person. And that's called bystander intervention. And that's something it's kind of like the bread and butter of social work, but it's about finding ways to intervene so that you're not just standing by letting these things happen, but you're actually doing something to make them stop. So the 4 Ds of bystander intervention, the first one is distract. So if you can distract a hateful exchange, either online or in person, either by like talking to someone one-on-one or kind of getting in the comments, changing the subject, that can be really helpful.
Buying a hot dog from a hot dog vendor and saying, come on, you hungry?
Yeah, yeah, exactly, if it's in person. I kind of, for the paper, I made it more about social media since none of us are really outside. But yeah, so that's one of them. Another is being direct and saying, sometimes all it takes is someone just saying, hey, that's not okay. Just being the first person to say, hey, that's not okay that you're saying that. And then delay is another one, which is where you just try to delay the interaction and say, hey, I feel like this is getting kind of intense. Can we talk about this later? Take them aside 20 minutes later, have a conversation about it. And then delegate is another one. So if you're online and you see kind of an intense exchange occurring, you can notify, if it's in a group, you can notify a moderator, especially in like streams and things like that. There's usually moderators, or you can delegate to someone who has a little bit more authority in whatever space you're in.
And you said this is bystander
intervention.
Bystander intervention, because a couple of you are saying, what can we do? What can we actually do? Bystander intervention, the 4 Ds: distract, direct, delay, delegate.
And just one thing, Robert, and adding on to what Monte-Angel said, for the people who want to do something, again, this is in more public areas like Facebook and Twitter, areas where, public interactions take place. Unfortunately, fortunately, the team on our side is working on, more of these fringe communities where very, very vitriolic content occurs. But wherever on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, within your communities or outside of your communities, if you see something that can potentially escalate into a lot bigger of a situation, go ahead and practice these 4 things. Again, our white paper is out there. We'll link it to you so we can, and again, there's a lot more research on this, but Monte-Angel described it perfectly. So practicing the 4 Ds when it's the most critical has a lot of positive consequences in almost every situation that you see right now.
Tammy T has a question, and then we're going to go to some photos, and then we're going to wrap up. If a woman lives alone and feels threatened, buys a gun, does that make her a violent person?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. If a woman lives alone and feels threatened and buys a gun, does that make her a violent person?
I think that comes back to the violence begets violence thing that we discussed before. People want to protect themselves. It's a loop because they experience violence on a daily basis. So for some people, that experience is more prevalent than for others, and they want to protect themselves. Speaking as a woman, I've had that desire too. And it's tricky because you have to get to the root of it to make it stop. And otherwise, it makes sense for someone to want to protect themselves and keep themselves safe.
And you have to consider the situations that what would have made that person be compelled to buy a gun, which is a very severe situation in the first place. And so, there's no moral judgment on whether buying a gun is right or not. For some people, it satisfies a need. For others, it's more than that. But what we can't say is, what is the definition of violence? What is the definition of being violent? So does it depend on acting on it, or is it a desire? There are so many definitions here. So again, no clear-cut answer.
Gotcha.
Yep.
All right, we're going to look at a couple photos, and then we'll finish up. Tell us what we're seeing here and where this was. By the way, audience, these are photos. I asked every guest to send me a dozen photos. So these are a random selection of photos. We don't go through them ahead of time to debrief on them or put them in a particular order. They just come up and we just roll with it.
Okay. All right, so this is one of mine. And what I'll say about sharing these is I just think it can get to a place sometimes when you're sharing about traumatic events just to kind of make it seem graphic. But there's a lot of power in sharing the photos in terms of sensitizing people to what happened. And this photo actually was not from the tragedy that I experienced, but was maybe 8 years before in our community, and was an act of violence where a young man tried to run over a bunch of people. And so our community in Isla Vista had been experiencing violence for a really long time, and this was kind of the incident preceding what happened when I was there.
Gotcha. This is a familiar image of an event, a negative event happens, and we then have people showing up to do vigils. I have a question first, besides where is this, but how effective do you guys feel having these vigils are? I mean, at a certain point, it kind of gets exhausting. And much like what we were talking about with George Floyd earlier, it's exhausting to go through the same routine and have the same conversations and the same rituals. So where is this tell me a little bit about your take on the ritual.
Yeah, so this is the after the tragedy at UC Santa Barbara, this vigil went around the entire community. And I wouldn't say it's a matter of effective or not, it's a need that arises when you experience something like this. And that's the research I'm doing right now, is why do people memorialize? Why do people feel the need to come together and collectively grieve? And they have to know that they're in this together. There's something uniting about it. And I think that it's maybe effective because people keep seeing the same people, the same faces in their community doing this, and it makes them want change. And it makes them meet other people who also want change. And that's why this pandemic is so hard right now, is because we can't collectivize as easily as we would normally without risk. So we're really missing out on that opportunity.
Jack Fuller has a great comment here and a little question related to what we're talking about. First of all, great conversation tonight. Over time, cigarettes and smoking took time to reverse thinking that they're valued. They have a value. We can reverse the thinking that owning a gun is, can we reverse the thinking that owning a gun is not a value to live for? And it talked, I think that just as a comment, not more so than a question, speaks to what you were saying, that it's a long haul, that these changes don't happen overnight. And yeah, 30, 20, 15 years ago, cigarette smoking was still in vogue. And now we know it's not good for you, and the thinking has changed. So good point, Jack. Thank you for bringing it up.
Definitely. Oh, that's me. So this was also at UC Santa Barbara, actually a couple months before the massacre, because we were experiencing a lot of acts of domestic violence and rape on our campus. So we had this campaign to write reasons why we wanted change and why we were walking the streets. And I think I included this picture was just to show how prevalent violence was in our community, and how even so, it took an act of mass violence for us to say enough is enough.
There's another one here from that campaign.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's something that happened to me. Like some guy came behind me, was trying to like talk to me or something like that. And I'm so short, I'm 5 foot, and I just was so intimidated by that. And I think that we don't always realize how important how our statures are, how close we are to people.
Yeah. This is from your community. I understand that.
Yeah.
Cookies.
Yeah. So this was maybe 2 or 3 days after that massacre. Me and my friend, we just really wanted to be out among everyone in our community. And this was her idea, was just to make cookies and just like hand them out to people, which is, I'm a little bit introverted. Like, I'm a data scientist. I don't love, doing that kind of stuff, but it just felt right. And everyone we encountered was just so appreciative and happy to see us. And it's just, I think I included it because it just draws back to that thing that happens, that very human need to collectivize and come together. Yeah. Same kind of idea here. This was a year after I went to a music festival called Lightning in a Bottle on the anniversary of the massacre, which is in California. So I brought that with me, that sign that I found at a rummage sale that we always have. And I just carried it around with me that day. And so many people came up to me and they just wanted to talk about it and just share what they went through, where they were, what they saw when it happened. Yeah, so this is the memorial wall that came up right after. We had so many spontaneous memorials happen in our community, and this one was the product of student government, and everyone came around and just like wrote their names on it, laid wreaths, and it still exists to this day. It's been preserved by the UCSB libraries along with a lot of other memorials. That's just me. I don't know.
Good. So I think this is related to a photo of the backpack. So we can come back. There it is.
Yeah. This was a protest that happened at the 4-year anniversary. I was there in the community doing interviews for my research. And this is what they decided to do to show how many students are impacted by mass violence. Each of the backpacks has a name on it and represents someone who lost their lives to mass violence.
There you are, Shreya.
Yep. So this photo just represents some of the, like things that kind of come out. You know, this was in one of the photo, but like one of the like, you know, news interviews that came out about me, but I really liked how school shooting fires up tech whiz to fight back, because that is what I am, more of a tech whiz than more than anything. So I was really happy that people were able and attracted to the idea that not one person is representative against the mass shooting fight, that there's multiple people behind the signs, and I'm one of them.
That's great. I want to get to just a couple more pictures. Give me 1 second to cue them up for us here. Wanted to include this one because I am so in love with both Nancy and Niall from the We Are Family Foundation. Do great work. Post-traumatic growth. There are so many things I've gotten out of tonight's conversation that I will be walking forward with, and that one is brilliant. Where did post-traumatic growth, that phrase, come from?
So it's a psychological concept that's been researched, and it's a growing field out of positive psychology. So looking not just at the things that are hard about trauma and stress and anxiety, but the things that help people recover and grow and transform. And this is the concept that I'm really interested in researching more.
Once again, our guest last night, Kathy Eldon, can speak to this. Her son was murdered in Somalia, and she spoke to this. She didn't use this phrase. I'm going to call her up and see if she's used it, but this is exactly what she was talking about, how she has healed and moved forward and stayed present. Okay. Yeah. What are we looking at?
The next photo is probably more indicative of, or sorry, not that photo. The next one about the STEM mass shooting.
Yeah, we'll find it.
Yeah, this one right here. So I took this on the day after of the shooting, and there's several poignant things about this. These are the youngest kids that came out of the shooting. All of them come out with their hands on their head. So that's kind of commonplace for when a school shooting occurs.
Which shooting is this?
This is the STEM mass shooting that happened in May of last year. And so you can see here, there's like, this photo gained like national attention. I'm sure people who have seen it already, but if you zoom in on the left, you can see a little girl praying. And so this was very emblematic of the type of stress that kids go through in these situations. If you look at the right, you can see a SWAT person holding a gun. And so this is probably like one of the best photos that represents what kids go through, because when they were filing out of the school, they had their hands on their head like they were the perpetrators of this shooting. Moreover, there's no tangible reason as to why kids have to put their hands on their head, but you can see the anguish that some of them are facing through, like the girl who was praying. Some of them are just in confusion. Some of them are joking it off, but in all, it isn't something that any young kid has to go through. So that's really what compels me to do my work.
And when you just said that you don't feel there's a need for them to have their hands on their heads. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, well, I asked the school about why there's a need for kids to put their hands on their heads. Some would say that it's for safety, so that way the kids can ensure single file line. Some say it's because they want to make sure that the kids themselves aren't the perpetrator and have the weapons on their hands. Yep. And for some, it's just commonplace. Whoever instituted it in the beginning they have their reason, but we just keep practicing it. So it's really about what are the most effective school shooting drills that take place. Why do kids have to go through this in the first place? So it talks about institutional change, both within society and the schools themselves. So overall, it's a very poignant image that sticks out to me the most, because not only was I there to experience it happen, but there were tons of little kids that were going through it too. And like when they were there, they were playing rock, paper, scissors, and hopscotch. But some of them were totally out of the loop on what was actually happening within that school. Parents outside were crying and in tears, begging to see their kids. And that was probably the most traumatic incident for me, because they were saying, like, is my kid safe? And we had no protocol in place to ensure that they were. And, and most of the kids, you can see the anguish on their faces. And they were going through this, and it's not something that can be repaired easily, experiencing it at such a young age.
I've watched this when they're being marched out of schools and they have their hands on their heads. And I've often thought how that adds to the trauma. And I do understand. And the one thing I felt was, well, yeah, any one of those kids might be complicit with the shooter, and might be, if their hands are in their pockets, they may pull something out, right? So I understand it on that level, but I get the sense to me though that just adds to the trauma, and it's like what happens to our brown and black young men that are criminalized just because of what they wear or what they look like and the color of their skin.
Yeah.
And that stays with you, and that starts to form that low self-esteem, and I think it's terrible. I don't know. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and I think that also just points to a place where two awesome fields are just not coming together, because we have amazing people doing great work in emergency preparedness, and we have amazing people doing work in trauma-informed care, which is the idea that we should make our spaces and our procedures as trauma-informed as possible, but they're not coming together to make things happen. Well, they're starting to, but they haven't historically, and that's been a problem.
That's what NeverAgainTech is about. It's about the convergence of all these different fields, which is why we have policymakers, trauma-informed specialists, doctors, students, policymakers, business executives, all converging on this platform of what can we do to help each other? What does your field have that we need to be informed about? And how can we all come together and coalesce, converge for one common solution?
Yeah.
All right. This is the part of the show where we finish with goodbyes and kudos and thank you. So people in chat, if you want to do some shout outs, please do. We've got a few already. B. Kim Taylor says this interview has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much. Callie Greenberg, thank you, Shreya and Monte-Angel. Let's see who else. Elizabeth Harder says this is sad that they have to go through this. Jack Fuller, thanks so much, Shreya and Monte-Angel, for your dedication to abolishing gun violence and mass shootings. Keep up the good work. Diane Callis just joined us. Hi, Diane. Zulima just joined us. Hi. So let's finish with a question that I've now been posing to my guests only since last night, and I should have been doing it from the beginning. What's your call to action? We've got an audience here now that can be your soldiers. We've got an audience now that can be your ambassadors of your work and your message. So what is a call to action that you can give us, knowing that we're all in here in this chat room, different people around the world, different cultures, different ages, generations, ethnicities. We don't have all the tools you have. Give us a call to action. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to say, Carly Palmer says, thank you for the work you do. Gina Angel says, thank you so much, both of you, for your passion and intelligence. Jose Esteban just joined us. Welcome, Jose. And so have Tivia, Yuva, Raju, and Archika Dogra have just joined us. Amy Alt says, good luck. Y'all give me hope. Jack Fuller says, weekends, once the best part of the week, are becoming harder to get through without time with our wonderful 10 p.m. with Galinsky. Thank you. Wally Green says, I think the most important part of this is dealing with mental health. Michael Swiskay, thank you both for a committed, noble cause, and may your efforts be fruitful. So call to action.
Monte-Angel, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think that my call to action, it's so complicated, this issue that we're dealing with, but just involve yourself. Like you play a role in this as well, and you have a voice in this. Like we heard so many great questions tonight from people who are involved, and I just think the more people we have weighing in on this and paying attention to this, the further we're going to get at getting to the root of this deeply entrenched problem in our American society. So I just think that it's so important that people continue to involve themselves in whatever capacity makes sense for you. For me, it's social work and data. For Shreya, it's data. And I think that we just all have these very unique perspectives that will end up disentangling this huge issue that is violence.
Yep.
Get involved. Get involved. Good.
And for me, I would say, as much as this sounds like imperative, it's imperative that we read, if you guys can read the white paper that we put out about the coronavirus and mass shooting increase, that would be incredibly helpful. So that way more people are aware of the consequences of this convergence of these multiple factors and what we can do about it. Because Monte-Angel does a brilliant job of getting into more of those bystander intervention techniques. The second thing is always visit us at NeverAgainTech.org. There we are always looking to expand our team. We have so many people already, but I only met Monte-Angel 6 months ago, and here we are today. And it's all because of an email that she sent me and our team about wanting to partake. So again, if anyone has thoughts, perspectives, connections, areas where we can come together and further the mission of NeverAgainTech, or the mission in general of the convergence of people from different areas against one goal, on one goal against one thing, that would be brilliant. So again, I think I'll be happy to post links that we have, anything that would be fruitful for you guys to help. But at the end of the day, we're listening to everyone, and we're trying to find as many commonalities as possible between different people. So never ever be afraid to reach out to us on our social media. NeverAgainTech is usually where you can find us. Send us your thoughts. I love Jack's questions today. They were so thought-provoking, and I wanted to have more of a one-on-one discussion where I can answer to you fully and without any like inhibition. So yeah, just make sure to please be in tune with what we're doing. Every day we have a different thing. Every day NeverAgainTech is doing something unique and different. One last thing I would say is someone on our team, someone who is of African American origin, is planning on creating an app, and we're rolling it out for her, where people in Black communities can use their cell phones in an app format to alert each other before police have to get involved. So community intervention on a tangible phone format. So we're always rolling out new initiatives, and we'd love your support. And overall, just have hope. I mean, Monte-Angel and I and our generation, my generation, is the biggest, attestation to hope, and the fact that we shouldn't give it up, that this is just the beginning, and we won't take no for an answer. So with that in mind, I hope I'll just deflect it back onto Robert.
It's been great. It's been great. I live in the East Village of Manhattan. There's a lot of poverty here. There's a lot of violence here, and we hear fights out our window on the corner here on 12th and C. And my neighbor and I have made a commitment to each other that we do not call the police first.
Yep.
We go down there and we try to assess what's going on and see if we as a community and neighbors can resolve this problem before just saying, hey, there's a fight down there, and it's been interesting and fruitful, because we don't know what happens when the police show up, and we don't know how people are going to respond and how the police will respond. And it's so much better when a community can work out its own problems right there. So thank you for that. NeverAgainTech. I read the white paper. It's super inspiring. It's not long too, which is
we try to make it as digestible as possible.
Great. I was intimidated at first. Like, we're going to send you the white paper, and I was like, the study. I was, oh my God. But
we need a TLDR version.
So packed with important information and data that, and such a short short report that it's wonderful, and people really do need to get it. So go to NeverAgainTech. Somebody just said, what if they have a weapon? Well, if they have a weapon, then we deal with the consequences if we're out there on the street. It hasn't happened yet. So when that happens, I'll tell you what happens when they have a weapon. Yep. Shreya and Monte-Angel, thank you. You guys are incredible. The work is awesome. We're going to visit with you again. I'm interested in every aspect of what you're doing, and so happy, as so many people have said, the hope that you're inspiring for us. So thank you so much. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a nice weekend.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.